school from Kung Fu culture. Thank you very much for joining us. We want to try to basically our whole idea is that one really famous line where you try to enlighten your own mind and at the same time you'd strengthen your body, make it very fierce and formidable. So that's what we strive to do here at our channel and through Chinese martial arts. And actually, like we kind of since any of you that have followed us, we've also kind of mentioned the philosophy from yoga and stuff. So because they have similar aspects, and quite often, say like in yoga, they might talk about breathing and the joining of the breath with the intention and the body. So there's a lot of that kind of thing or that kind of philosophy or techniques in a lot of like internal kung fu practices. So that's why I kind of like. So it doesn't have to be only Chinese martial arts stuff or Chinese philosophy here. So just throwing that out there. Uh, so we really just have a couple of announcements. So we teach at UCLA mostly for the Sanda, like all the Chinese martial arts, like the Tai Chi, Qigong, Sanda stuff. But those classes are ending this week, and then we won't be back in session until the beginning of the new year. So if you have any watching this and you want to, and if you have access to the gym, to the university gym at the university at UCLA, or at the University of California, Los Angeles, then hit us up in the new year. We'll be back in January. If you want any private lessons, you can always message through especially our Instagram. I think that one usually can notify us, um, or there might be some access through our website, or check it out. Let us know because several people do train with us privately. Um, so yeah, they found a way. If you want to, where there's a will, there's a way, right? So um, so there, right? Uh, but let's go ahead and get to the topic at hand. So what happened is, like, so especially those of you who are more literate in Chinese, right? So if you can read Chinese characters, or if you maybe study Japanese and you are getting familiar with a lot of, since they use a lot of the Chinese characters too, and if you learn them, or if you're a native speaker or not or whatever, you might be familiar with some characters, right? And so if you ever look at modern sumo wrestling, or if you see a sign for sumo wrestling written in Japanese, they use Chinese characters for that, right? Then, but the characters for sumo wrestling are not the same as the characters that are used in modern China for wrestling. It's totally different. Uh, the way the sumo wrestling characters are pronounced is Xiang Pu, and then currently in China, the 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 characters for wrestling are pronounced Shuai Jiao, right? So, uh, what happened, right? And basically, you can, even though in modern times the characters are different from each other, right? You get a clue that there is some Chinese origin in the Japanese thing, just because the title or the name is in Chinese, right? Or in Chinese characters, but kind of gives you a clue that it's probably Chinese in origin. So you're exactly right. If you thought that, you'd be exactly right. Um, but just how far back does that go? Because currently, like sumo wrestling is quintessentially Japanese. It is so integrated in a lot of Japanese culture, Japanese philosophy, and like you like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily recognize anything like Chinese about it. So you got to go way back in time to see the origin, and then you see the evolution to what we have today. So let's start thinking about like how long ago was wrestling kind of in China, and how did it develop into sumo, and then how did sumo get to Japan? So let's start from some of the earliest days. So basically, thousands of years ago, China has basically it's like a cradle of civilization, and humans all around the world loved combat sports or combat exhibitions. So there was a lot of uh, like shows where actually really similar to what we had in like the 1800s, early 1900s in Western countries, where you could have like fairs, big variety shows where maybe someone will do some kind of wrestling exhibition. So China had a lot of that, right? So uh, a long time ago, you had what the predecessor of sumo wrestling, which was often called Jiao Di, where uh, you'd see people where sometimes they would dress up in like horned helmets or horned hats, and they would be grappling with each other, trying to like overpower each other. And so that was what you might be seeing at some of these like variety shows or kind of festival times. But that was a very, very long time ago. But now let's go to another time. So we'll give you kind of a date. So it's like approximately 200 BCE. All right. So that's this time. All right. So they wore horned helmets and head-butted opponents, imitating bulls or wild beasts. Right. Um, so later on, so over the centuries, the horns were discarded, right? You didn't use that, and then you had a shift to actually grappling with each other, using more wrestling techniques, and shifting to maybe more of a almost like an MMA version, right? So you would have a little some striking, some grappling, and that's what it evolved into, right? So this evolution was called xiangpu, or the way it's pronounced in Japanese, sumo, right? So that is kind of where it started, where the name changed. And I think I kind of mentioned it recently, like say in our recent podcast, we when I had the special guest from China, right? Claire, you've seen her in some of our videos as well when she was still in the United States. We ended up going over the one of the most important or one of the most famous Chinese books in like Chinese literary history. So the Water Margin. So in one of the chapters, there is an actual wrestling match, and that chapter in Chinese they use that word xiangpu to for wrestling, and so that book was written, I believe, the 1300s. But anyway, so you just see like these connections, right, between the name, right, and that being what what was used for wrestling, or what was used to as the name for wrestling, and so this evolution to Xiangpu kind of ended up um, like having the just taking over from like these more elaborate kind of more costumed type wrestling matches, right? So was kind of like the main difference, right? So the at that time Xiangpu was a little bit closer to, I guess, like MMA, right? Because you can have some strikes and some kicks. Yeah, it was more entertainment, right? It had no ring, right? So, but in say like in Water Margin, they're up on a platform in that scene. So a lot of it was still similar in that you had to really beat that person. You can throw them off the stage, off the platform, and stuff. Um, but you don't really see, or it wasn't considered at that time to have any of these other things that you would see with modern sumo, where I don't know if people notice that much, but there's like a lot of kind of ritualistic and different beliefs that um, are kind of included into it. Where say like there was even in the news that so like Japan just elected a woman prime minister, and there was debate online, right? Where like so at the end of every sumo tournament, the winner will often say like they don't always have to go, but often the prime minister will go and present a trophy to the winner. So there was a big debate like is the new prime minister going to go um, because because of some of the rules and kind of like rituals of sumo is like women cannot touch that platform that they compete on. So it's like where do those things come about? Like so you could see like uh, um, these different evolutions, right? So but right now we'll go back in time. So it's like you have the evolution in China from one style of kind of military competition or like kind of combat exhibition kind of that was entertaining to people to a little bit more kind of shift to more combat oriented where it was like really more close to MMA, right? And then the name changed to Xiangpu or Sumo, right? And then from there, you kind of get this thing where um, you're gonna see a transition. So like this is later after this evolution. This is when you start getting the introduction of this wrestling style to Japan, right? So it and it wasn't just a clear cut and paste as we see like sumo today, right? You see what happened is that at this time during the seventh to ninth centuries, right? So this is like common era now. Um, you're like Japan wanted to model themselves, at least like the court uh, after the Tang Dynasty, right? So what are we seeing, right? So we see this. It was like a deliberate cultural importation during that time when Japan was actively modeling itself after the Tang Dynasty. So it says like the wrestling didn't arrive as a sport, but as a court ceremony. The Japanese imperial court established an annual wrestling festival held in the imperial gardens, right? And then so from later on it became kind of like the physical act was Chinese xiangpu. The context was immediately Japanese. The Japanese stripped away the chaotic variety show aspects, right? And they they surrounded the bouts with a more solemn Shinto, which is the Japanese kind of more traditional uh, philosophy or religion. Shin, I believe, is like uh, the like God, right? So it's kind of like the it was their natural. I mean, it was their what's it called? It was like the Japanese uh, cultural traditional like religion or philosophy. Right. So as you know, I don't know that much about and like I don't know as much in depth about Japan stuff. So except I like sumo wrestling, right? So I don't know that much about Shinto. Right? So what else did the Japanese do to start evolving Xiangpu away from China to turn into or evolve it into modern sumo wrestling? Right. Even what I just mentioned a little earlier was like the ring itself. So like the platform. So even though you like even though in modern China or even in modern Sanda kickboxing, it's still like international competition is still held on a platform. We call it a lei tai nowadays. That is considered like a throwback to like the way Chinese people have done a lot of these martial art contests throughout the centuries or throughout the millennia, really. Um, so so the Xiang or Sumo has that platform, but they kind of add these their own beliefs into it to kind of make it uniquely Japanese, right? So one thing that was in some of the articles was that it said like the sumo ring is not just uh, like it's not just like a wrestling mat. It is a, of course it's clay, and it is supposed to be like uh, like a representation of like this, we say like a square platform, but with the circle in it, right? So it says like the sumo platform is square, representing the earth, right? It's made out of clay, right? But then the ring itself, right, where they compete inside, right, is a actual circle, and then that symbolizes like heaven and like the struggle between the heaven and earth, right? Between the wrestlers, symbolizing like, or making the wrestling itself like more metaphysical, or even kind of like more all encompassing than just a pure wrestling match or a pure grappling match. The Japanese added a lot of uh, importance and heaviness to the actual matches. I think maybe even nowadays it might not be considered like so heavy, because a lot of people just, they really enjoy the spectator aspect of it. um, but um, so it's not like especially like the commentators and stuff at the sumo tournaments are not always talking about, oh, the harvest and all these other things that um, they might have talked about like a long time ago. But uh, it still has these associations. So say like even the roof that's suspended over the the ring or the dohyo, um, that represents kind of like a Shinto shrine roof, right? So over the years, also too, because of like as the sport grew and like they had to get cameras and stuff. So then it used to have pillars, right? And then pretty soon, like they got rid of all that. So now it's just the roof itself is suspended high above the dohyo or the platform. But so it still is like a callback to the the Shinto aspect that they added to it, right? Um, so a couple more rituals that they added, or that they really make sure to include, which is actually really fun. I think one of the funnest rituals that everyone, all the spectators seem to love, is the salt throwing. So before a match, as like often as the sumo wrestler will start climbing up onto the stage, right? They have these big baskets of salt, and the wrestler will grab a huge handful, and like they'll throw it up, and it'll spread across the dohyo, and people love it. Like if they if a wrestler can just get like this huge salt cloud or whatever to spread across the ring. It's the whole idea is that it's like there for purification. Um, you'll see that a lot of times where it's like in different philosophies, where they talk about kind of like clearing up the space, especially against like bad spirits. They throw salt. That's also so like in Chinese history, where salt, or even say like if you know a lot about like herbology and stuff, then a lot of monks and stuff, if they were traveling and they needed to just like sleep in an abandoned area, then they might burn some specific herbs that really helped. They say in herbology, they say it help to clear the dampness, right, of a certain area. So it helps to basically kind of clean and disinfect, and then they also say kind of helps to uh, like purify the area from bad spirits, because everything's all dark and damp. Then it's just like bad energy, right? Because you have all this. It's just like it's just a bad environment that makes bacteria grow easily. So it's just like a bad feeling overall. So this whole idea of salt or drying out a certain area, that's like that energy, or that philosophy is behind the whole salt throwing. And you see it in many cultures around the world. uh, so the another thing that like they kind of add, right? So is like the whole thing about like you see like the sumo wrestler bring up one leg and then they stomp, and they bring up the other leg and they stomp. It shows about it's actually really difficult. I've competed in sumo wrestling. uh, is more difficult than it seems. Keeping your balance. Because you want to do it slowly. You want to show all your control. So sometimes in trying to show control and strength, you can kind of lose balance and stuff. But besides showing that balance and strength, it's also about, like, at least in the Japanese context, it's about frightening away demons lurking in the earth and waking up the spirits of the land to ensure a good harvest. All right, so these are things that were kind of like really kind of woven in, particularly by the Japanese, into sumo, that makes this it's like further separating the thing that has the Chinese origin, and really they're taking it and making it their own thing, right? And then also over time, the like say then you know, the xiangpu is still evolving, not only in Japan but in China as well. So what you see is that, like, in modern sumo wrestling, there's not really kicks, or actually, well, there there is no kicks, or there are no kicks allowed, but you will still see some trips and stuff like that, but not a straight up kick, right? But there's no punching, but there's still palm strikes, right? You still have some of the forearm strikes. Those things you will still see, but it's less of like a MMA bout, right? And the goal is to either get the person out of the ring or get them to touch the ground with any part of the body besides the bottoms of their feet, right? So uh, that's really what's characteristic of Japanese sumo, right? But then what happened in China as it was still evolving, right? So then the China evolution became what we call nowadays like the Chinese wrestling, right? Or the Chinese, often it's called Shuaijiao, but so Shuaijiao itself is like the Chinese wrestling, or the name for wrestling in Chinese or in Mandarin. Uh, and that's the one thing that a lot of people say, like in the United States, they don't quite know. They just all they what is commonly referred to as like Chinese style wrestling in Chinese, or traditional Chinese wrestling. Uh, so it has a longer name, right? So to make sure that you know specifically what they're talking about. But in the United States, a lot of people will just call traditional Chinese wrestling shuai jiao, right? So that even though they're only saying wrestling, that it's still kind of like what they know, or what is known as, like, in Western countries. Right. So, so what we have in China nowadays is vest or jacket, or what I usually call jacket wrestling. Right. So you have an open vest with some short sleeves. You'll have a belt. So just like sumo wrestling, they have a belt, but they don't have tops. Right. In China, the traditional Chinese jacket wrestling has the pants, right, and the wrestling shoes, but all that stuff isn't there in sumo, right? So you'll see how, like, even though they have a same origin, the the evolution, like, is pretty fascinating, right? So then, say, like in Japan, how sumo has the whole, like harvest festival thing, or I say, like, even after, at the end of, like, if you see the whole tournament, right, and sumo wrestling, at the end of the the day of wrestling, you have them do some rituals where certain dances and stuff that help symbolize these ideas about, like, the harvest, and these different kind of agricultural rituals and stuff, that in modern China, with the Shuai Jiao competition, it's just a competition. It's not anything more than that. It's like, say, modern Shuai Jiao rules. It'll be like you have like two halves, and whoever gets the most takedowns within these two time periods is the winner. So, but it's still somewhat similar in that you can't touch the ground, right? You can't do, like, say, like modern freestyle wrestling, where a lot of people do like that knee over toe double leg. You can't do that. you can still grab the leg. So it's like it's more free than judo, where it's not really allowed to grab the legs. But in Shaijiao, you can kind of grab them. Like say you can do ankle picks, you can do like all these different knee taps and stuff. So knee block takedowns and all that stuff is legal, right? So um, and so like all of the leg trips and stuff are legal as well, but of course you can't kick and punch. So you see how these things kind of have a uh, similarities, but they've become their own thing, right? So they've even though they started, hundreds of actually well thousand or a couple of thousand years ago in China, even in China it evolved to what it is today. And a long time ago, when it was introduced to Japan, they really fell in love with it. They took it and ran with it and really integrated it into their culture. I really enjoy the Japanese the professional sumo. I'm really happy for Awanishki, who just won. He's like the first Ukrainian to win a whole professional tournament in Japan, using a lot of like wrestling or like freestyle wrestling. So even though he grew up, he has a really unique story, and actually we go more into it on our wrestling channel, like the Catch Wrestling Alliance. So you can check out our latest podcast. I go over Awanishki's backstory, but he's really interesting in that in Ukraine, he grew up wanting to do sumo wrestling and then supplementing his sumo wrestling with the freestyle wrestling and some judo. But he's even said in interviews that the wrestling, so like the freestyle wrestling, is what helps him to win more than the judo. So um, sumo doesn't really have that. Like the origin is different, right, from judo, and I like to think it's like say still more wrestling based, right, instead of like a upright. So I consider like a sumo, or sorry, I consider judo to be more of like this upright wrestling style. But anyway, so Aonishki was able to then, like during the Ukraine Russia invasion thing going on, he became a refugee in Japan and then just became pro and is like dominating nowadays. So he has a really cool story. We kind of go into a little bit more on the Catch Wrestling Alliance podcast on that channel. Maybe I'll do a community post about it. But um, anyway, this is kind of like the it's kind of cool to see the origin of things and like how they evolve over time. That's at least really interesting. All right, my cat totally just ran behind the computer and yanked on the cord. All right, so he's already kind of back there. So all right, so anyway, so let's go ahead and kind of just like end it here because it basically gave you all the information. Super old, right? Had a different name, changed to what we know today and as the same name that's still used in Japan, right? The Xiangpu, or in Japanese pronounced sumo. And the rules have kind of changed, but you see, like even with the modern Shuaijiao, there's still kind of like the same uh, spirit there, where it's like you can't really touch the ground with your hands, right? Otherwise, you're considered down, right? You so same with both styles, except in Japan, you just have the belt on. In modern Chinese style wrestling or traditional jacket wrestling, you have the vest with the belt and pants and wrestling shoes. So um, it's pretty interesting how the same thing evolved over time. At least that's one of the main interesting things to me. So feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. See if there's anything interesting about that, like the differences. See if you like sumo. Let me know if you like Shuai Jiao more, or many people call it 中国式 Shuai Jiao, like the Chinese style wrestling. If you like that, let me know. Because every once in a while I try to do some videos where we kind of show the different techniques that happen to like an MMA match or sumo match, how you can use it in the traditional Chinese jacket wrestling. So just let us know if you're interested in some of that. We definitely want to try to be putting out a little bit more of the internal stuff. Like we have some requests for more videos about like the Tai Chi philosophy and Tai Chi techniques. So we want to try to do more of those, but we're definitely open to suggestions about any kind of content that you're interested in that is related to like martial art philosophy or Chinese martial arts in general. So just hit us up. All right. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you next time.